Hey, level casters. Today's lesson takes us on a journey back in time, to a pivotal moment in the 20th century. A conflict often called the Forgotten War. We're talking about the Korean War, a complex and impactful event that shaped the world we live in today. Don't worry if you don't know much about it yet. We're going to break it down step by step, making sure everything is clear and easy to understand. Imagine a world just after World War II, a world divided by new ideas and powerful nations. The map of Asia was changing, and new countries were emerging from colonial rule. Korea, a peninsula located between China and Japan, had been under Japanese control for many years. When World War II ended in 1945, Japan lost its power, and Korea was finally free. But this freedom came with a new challenge. The victorious Allied powers, particularly the United States and the Soviet Union, had different ideas about how Korea should be governed. This disagreement led to a temporary division of Korea at the 38th parallel, an imaginary line across the middle of the country. The Soviet Union supported a communist government in the north, led by Kim Il-sung, while the United States backed a democratic government in the south, led by Syngman Rhee. Both leaders wanted to unite Korea under their own rule, and this strong desire created a very tense situation. The stage was set for a major conflict, a struggle not just for Korea itself, but also for the future of political systems in Asia and beyond. Understanding this initial division is key to understanding why the war began and why it became so significant. It wasn't just a local dispute, it was a reflection of a much larger global struggle. The tension between North and South Korea grew steadily after 1945. Both sides had strong armies and leaders who believed in their cause. Border clashes became common, almost daily occurrences. It was like a simmering pot, ready to boil over at any moment. Then, on June 25, 1950, the pot finally boiled. North Korean forces, heavily armed and supported by the Soviet Union, launched a surprise invasion across the 38th parallel into South Korea. Their goal was clear: to quickly conquer the South and unite the entire peninsula under communist rule. The invasion was swift and devastating. South Korean forces were unprepared and quickly pushed back. The capital city of Seoul fell within days. The world watched in shock. The United Nations, a new international organization formed to prevent future wars, immediately condemned North Korea's actions. The United States, seeing this as a direct challenge to its policy of containing communism, quickly decided to intervene. President Harry S. Truman believed that if communism was allowed to spread unchecked in Korea, it would encourage similar invasions elsewhere, potentially leading to another world war. Other countries, including Great Britain, Canada, and Australia, also sent troops as part of a United Nations force. General Douglas MacArthur, a famous American military leader from World War II, was put in charge of these UN forces. The early days of the war were very difficult for the UN and South Korean troops. They were pushed almost to the very tip of the Korean peninsula, a small area known as the Pusan perimeter. It looked like North Korea might win the war very quickly. But the UN forces held on, and a daring plan by General MacArthur was about to change the course of the war dramatically. This period was crucial because it showed the world that the international community, led by the US, was willing to fight to stop the spread of communism, turning a regional conflict into a global ideological battleground. The turning point came with General MacArthur's audacious Incheon landing in September 1950. This was a risky amphibious assault, meaning troops landed from the sea, far behind North Korean lines. It was a brilliant move that completely surprised the North Koreans. The UN forces quickly captured Incheon and then moved to retake Seoul. This cut off the North Korean supply lines, trapping many of their soldiers. The tide of the war turned dramatically. The North Korean army, once so confident, was now in full retreat. UN and South Korean forces pursued them relentlessly, pushing them back across the 38th parallel and then continuing north, aiming to unify Korea under South Korean rule. It seemed like the war would be over soon, and victory was within reach. However, this aggressive advance towards the Chinese border alarmed China. China, a communist nation itself, saw the UN forces approaching its border as a direct threat to its own security. Despite warnings from China, General MacArthur continued the advance. In October 1950, hundreds of thousands of Chinese, volunteer, troops secretly crossed the Yalu River into Korea. This was a massive and unexpected intervention. The Chinese forces launched a powerful counteroffensive, catching the UN and South Korean troops by surprise. They were pushed back, once again past the 38th parallel, and Seoul fell for a second time. The war became a brutal stalemate, with fierce fighting along a constantly shifting front line, roughly around the 38th parallel. This period was incredibly intense and violent, with heavy casualties on all sides. The involvement of China transformed the conflict from a regional war into a much larger international confrontation, raising fears of a wider global war between the communist bloc and the Western powers. The hopes for a quick victory vanished, replaced by a long, grinding struggle. After the dramatic shifts and intense fighting, the Korean War settled into a brutal stalemate. For 2 long years, from mid-1951 to mid-1953, the front lines barely moved. The fighting became a war of attrition, with both sides dug into heavily fortified positions. Similar to trench warfare in World War I, there were countless small battles, but no major breakthroughs. The focus shifted from grand offensives to peace negotiations. Talks began in July 1951, but they were long, difficult, and often broke down. A major sticking point was the issue of prisoners of war, POWs. Many North Korean and Chinese POWs did not want to return to their communist countries, and the UN insisted they should have a choice. This disagreement prolonged the negotiations significantly. Finally, after 2 years of talks and continued fighting, an armistice agreement was signed on July 27, 1953. An armistice is a ceasefire, not a permanent peace treaty. It established a demilitarized zone, DMZ, along the 38th parallel, a heavily guarded border that still exists today, separating North and South Korea. The armistice also created the Military Armistice Commission to oversee the ceasefire. The war ended without a clear victory for either side. Korea remained divided, and technically, the two Koreas are still at war because a peace treaty was never signed. The Korean War had a profound impact. Millions of Koreans died, and the country was devastated. It cemented the division of Korea and intensified the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. It also established the precedent for future UN interventions and demonstrated America's commitment to containing communism. The war showed the world the dangers of proxy wars and the devastating human cost of ideological conflicts. It was a harsh lesson, and its legacy continues to shape international relations in East Asia and beyond.
That was a fascinating story about the Korean War.
Yes, it was much more complex than I thought.
I didn't know about the division at the 38th parallel.
That was the starting point for everything.
And the surprise invasion by North Korea was so sudden.
It shocked the whole world at the time.
General MacArthur's Incheon landing was very clever.
It completely changed the war's direction.
But then China's entry made it much bigger.
Yes, that led to the long, difficult stalemate.
The idea of a forgotten war makes sense now.
It's important to remember these events.
The armistice, not a peace treaty, is interesting.
So they are technically still at war.
The DMZ is a very sad reminder of that.
It shows the lasting impact of conflict.
I learned so much today about this war.
Me too. It was a great lesson.
I feel much more informed now.
It's crucial for understanding modern history.
That was a really insightful lesson.
I agree. Keep learning, Levelcasters.
That's all for today. Keep it up, and we'll see you in the next Levelcast lesson.